Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I recently dropped a full mock draft talking about the NBA draft in depth, every pick 1 to 30, the entire first round, and what that I think each team should do, and something that could possibly happen with each team on November 18th when the draft occurs. However, I want to go more in depth to a lot of these picks, and obviously the logical place to start would be the number one overall pick, which will be made by, well, appears to will be made by the Minnesota Timberwolves. They have a few options with this pick, and today I'm going to talk in detail about each of these options and how I think that they can affect this team and what their roster will look like moving forward. I will also talk about what options I think are the best for them and what I think is the most likely scenario for what happens. So, without further ado, let's get right into this. The first thing I would do if I were the Minnesota Timberwolves is I would call the Washington Wizards and the Philadelphia 76ers and I would say, hey, do you have any interest in the first round, the number one overall pick for Ben Simmons in the Sixers case or Bradley Beal in the Wizards case? These two guys are both top 25 players and they would really, really change the fortunes of this franchise. They're both considerably young. Neither of them is on a decline. I think that Brad is like 26 and Ben is 24. So there's even a chance that we could see some improvement from them and see them both move into the top 15 players in the NBA in the next season. So if you're able to get a player like that, you really need to pounce on that opportunity, especially if you're a team like the Timberwolves that doesn't have your first round pick for next season. In my opinion, since you don't have that pick, you have no reason to be bad next year, and you need to go all in and do what you can to make the playoffs, especially with Karl Anthony Towns expressing that wants to make the playoffs, and he is a top 25 player in the league, maybe better in some people's opinions. I think on my list I came out with a few days ago, I had him like 24th. So you need to do what you can to keep him happy so you don't have to get rid of him because he is a younger guy. I think he's about 25. If he can make strides on the defensive end of the floor, he could move into being a top 10 or 15 player in the league and become one of the best centers in the league, jump into that conversation with Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic. So you need to keep him happy, and getting a guy like Ben Simmons or Bradley Beal would do plenty for that because they would make this team a legitimate playoff contender, which is something I don't really think they are now. I don't think that either of those teams will part with those players, both because we've heard that they aren't going to, and also because if the Wolves are going to get them, they're going to have to probably give up more than the number one overall pick. I think that Ben Simmons and Bradley Beal are probably more valuable than LaMelo Ball or James Wiseman or Anthony Edwards, who are the consensus top three guys in this draft. So I do think you're going to have to throw in something else, and that might just be D'Angelo Russell. So I'm not even sure if the Wolves would want to do Russell in the number one overall pick for Bradley Beal or Ben Simmons. It would be a lot to give up, especially since Russell is Karl Anthony Towns' best friend. And like I said before, you want to keep Karl happy. And trading his best friend away from your team, not the best look. So I do think that if you're able to do it without giving up Russell, you should absolutely do that trade. If it's a signing trade with Malik Beasley attached to the number one overall pick for Ben Simmons, although then you would have to make the selection. I don't know. That would get really, really complicated. You'd have to make the pick, and then Malik Beasley would have to say he wanted to go to Philadelphia or to Washington. So it is a little confusing, but if you can figure out a way to do it without throwing in D'Lo, absolutely, you have to trade for Brad Beal or Ben Simmons in that situation. But if you do have to throw in D'Lo, that probably doesn't work, and there is a chance that those teams wouldn't even want to do it to begin with. So my second option for the Wolves would be call up the New Orleans Pelicans, call up David Griffin. I almost said Dell Demps, but obviously he's out the door there. Call up David Griffin and say, hey, let's get a deal done centered on the number one overall pick for Drew Holiday. I think that Holiday might be a little bit of a undersell for the number one overall pick. So if you can get them to throw in JJ Redick and find a way to make the salaries work, obviously James Johnson's contract would be included in this trade. So like the number one overall pick, James Johnson, maybe like a Jake Layman contract for Drew Holiday and JJ Redick. I haven't run a trade machine on any of these. They're just kind of ideas I came up with off the top of my head. So I'm not sure if they would work or not, but if you can do that trade, I would absolutely do it. I do think that that would escalate uh, the Timberwolves into the conversation for at least the 8 seed and make them a really solid playoff contender. Drew Holiday is a top 30 player in the NBA, and he would be an excellent backcourt partner for D'Angelo Russell, as he could share some of the ball handling duties while also not necessarily having to have the ball in his hand a lot. He could make up for some of D'Angelo's lacking in the on the defensive end of the floor, and he could also provide some playmaking that isn't necessarily D'Lo's strong suit. So I think that Drew Holiday would be an excellent option for the Wolves to target in a trade. And if you can get the Pelicans to throw in JJ Redick, all the better, because you're just adding an excellent floor spacer that will continue to make your team better. The next couple options I have are mostly just trade downs. The first one being Miles Bridges in the 3rd pick from the Hornets. This could be very interesting because you could add a good defender to your starting lineup in Miles Bridges, and also a guy who can knock down some 3-point shots and also be a bit of a slasher. He would fit very nicely in between D'Lo and Karl Towns and would immediately be probably the 3rd best player on this roster. If I am Charlotte, I would certainly consider this, because let's say Charlotte loves LaMelo Ball, or they love James Wiseman. You don't really want to risk those guys being taken with the 1st or 2nd overall pick, so why not just move up to number 1 and grab your favorite guy in the draft as soon as you can. Miles Bridges is a solid young player, but I view him as more of a 4 moving forward than a 3. And PJ Washington is probably a better player than Miles Bridges is already, and he is a couple of years younger as well. So I don't think giving up Miles Bridges would be the worst thing in the world. However, if they aren't even interested in taking one of those top 3 and they're going to take like Onyeka Okongwu or Denny Avdija, then they probably would not want to trade up. Maybe they'd even be trading down in that situation. So there's a very good chance that Charlotte would not be interested in doing that. If they wouldn't, I would try to trade to the 4th pick with the Bulls. Try to get Kobe White or Lauri Markkanen in exchange for the number 1 overall pick. One or the other, not both. That would be way too much if it was White, Markkanen, and the 4th pick for number 1. But if you can do 1 for White and 4, I do think that that is something that you could at least think about. This would probably be the Bulls trading up to draft LaMelo Ball. And I think that that would be something they should think about, because LaMelo would pair up much better with Zach LaVine in the backcourt, as LaMelo is a better playmaker and doesn't need the ball in his hands nearly as much as Kobe White does. He's not as much of a scorer. And that could be a very nice backcourt pairing for them. The defense wouldn't be great there, but I do think that LaMelo's defense is going to develop after a few years in the league. So this is something I would definitely think about if I were the Bulls. It doesn't make the most sense to me if I am the Timberwolves, because that backcourt pairing with D'Angelo Russell and Kobe White is really, really weird. Not a lot of defense, not a lot of playmaking, too much scoring maybe. So if I'm the Timberwolves, I'd probably prefer Lauri Markkanen as the guy who can slide in at the 4 spot alongside Karl Towns in the front court. He could be an excellent fit with the Timberwolves as a guy who can space the floor, can do a bit in the post. Not great on defense, but maybe that's just what this team is. They're not going to be good on defense. He fills a very big need for them at the 4, as of right now, their starting options there are like James Johnson or Amari Spellman. So clearly Lauri Markkanen would be a big upgrade from those guys. And I certainly think that if you could get that, if you're the Timberwolves, you should do it. And there's a chance that the Bulls would want to move on from Lauri due to Wendell Carter's expressed interest in playing the 4. They could trade up with the 4th pick and Lauri and take James Wiseman at number 1 overall, so you can pair Carter and Wiseman in a devastating defensive front court. There's not a whole lot there on the offensive end of the floor because I don't think that Carter is a great option at the 4 on the offensive end, but maybe it's something they want to try. In the end, I really don't think that any deal with the Bulls is my favorite. Two other teams that are much later in the draft that I think they could trade with are the Suns and the Magic. In the case of the Suns, like Kelly Oubre and the 10th pick. In the case of the Magic, Aaron Gordon and the 15th pick. However, I don't think either of those is enough for the number 1 overall pick. So with Oubre and 10, the Suns maybe have to give up a second round pick or someone that they've taken in the second round recently, like Jalen LeCue or Ty Jerome or, well, Javon Carter's a free agent, so they couldn't trade him. But there's some options there to get that deal done. And with Aaron Gordon in 15, maybe the Magic have to throw in a future first or something of that order. And that could be very interesting. Oubre's fit isn't my favorite just because it's another guy that could use the ball in his hands. I don't know. I'm not the biggest Kelly Oubre fan in general, so I don't love the ideas of teams like the Timberwolves and Warriors trading for him. But I do think that if Aaron Gordon is put in the right situation, he could be a really nice fit. And if you put him on a team like the Timberwolves, where he can be your Draymond Green type player, where you've got the offense around him and he's really just got to focus on the defensive end of the floor, that can be really, really nice. And he's playing the 4. He can play some small ball 5 when Cat is out of the game. Like I said before, the 4 is a big need for them. As Aaron Gordon would be a clear upgrade for James Johnson, who they would give up in this trade. James Johnson and 1 for Aaron Gordon, 15, and like their 2022 lottery protected first round pick. That would make some sense to me. 2 first round picks and Aaron Gordon for the number 1 overall pick. I don't know. Magic fans, let me know what you think of that one. Those are the only trades I really like that I came up with. Some other ones were like Victor Oladipo and Doug McDermott, but I just don't think that the Pacers have a great way of getting to one, giving up enough value without giving up too much. Like Oladipo and Miles Turner is too much, but Oladipo and McDermott is not enough, so I just don't see that working out. Kevin Love in 5 was another thing that I thought about, but if I'm the Timberwolves, I just really don't want to take on Kevin Love's contract. I don't think that he's a significant enough upgrade for them, and not even really a good fit either. So I don't think that I would want to make that deal. John Collins in 6 from the Hawks would make some sense, but I just don't think that the Hawks love Anthony Edwards enough to make that trade, or LaMelo Ball, but definitely don't pair LaMelo Ball with Trae Young. That would be awful. And they have Clint Capella, so Wiseman doesn't make the most sense. Maybe it's Capella and 6, and they move Cat over to the 4. That could be something, and draft like Isaac Okoro at the 6th pick. And you can have a lineup of D'Lo, Malik Beasley, Okoro, Towns and Capella, because this is in the Capella situation. That could be interesting. Could be an intriguing starting lineup, but in the end, I really don't think that happens for the Hawks. I think they don't want to give up John Collins. In the end, I think they are going to end up extending him this offseason, so maybe it's DeAndre Hunter in 6, but who knows. And Rudy Gobert in 23 was another one I cooked up, but I think they want to play Cat at the 5, so really that's why a Capella deal wouldn't work, and neither would a Gobert deal. If the Timberwolves don't end up trading their pick, which, like I said, is what I think they should do. But if they don't, my next option for them would be to draft LaMelo Ball, who is my number 1 overall prospect in this draft and who I had them taking in my mock draft video that I came out with yesterday. LaMelo is going to be a really, really good playmaker in the NBA. I do believe that his shot is going to come along, and so is his defense. And at that point, you've got a really, really solid franchise point guard for you. And I think that the fit between him and D'Lo might be a little underrated. Like, people have been hating on it since the start, since they're both going to need the ball in their hands. But D'Angelo Russell can be a solid spot-up shooter, and who knows if he loves it or not. But LaMelo Ball, excuse me, not Lonzo. LaMelo has a chance to be a generational playmaking talent, and if you're playing with a guy like that, you're still going to get your fair share of touches. It's not like LaMelo is going to come in and average 20 and D'Lo's scoring average is going to drop to 14. D'Lo is still going to get his buckets, and obviously the defense is questionable, but I do think that LaMelo is going to figure it out by the end of his rookie contract, and at that point, you've got a really scary offensive spearhead in LaMelo, D'Lo, and Karl Anthony Towns, and if at least two of the three of them become respectable defenders, because I think Karl Towns can, and I think LaMelo can, you're really just stuck with D'Lo. That makes the whole Malik Beasley thing a little questionable because they gave up a first round pick to get him, and you're pretty much just not going to start him if you sign LaMelo Ball because you're going to have D'Lo at the 2 and LaMelo at the 1. Unless you bring LaMelo off the bench, which could be possible. They could stagger the minutes between D'Lo and LaMelo, said at least one of them is on the court at all times and they get some minutes together. That could be a possibility. Obviously, you don't want to bring your number one overall pick off the bench, but this isn't a conventional year, and maybe LaMelo ends up being a very nice sixth man option who plays 24 or 25 minutes a night off your bench for you. In the end, I think that he is a very, very good player, or I think he will be a very, very good player. And if I were the Wolves and I can't trade my number one overall pick, he's the guy I'm picking up. My third option after trading the pick or drafting LaMelo, I have it written drafting James Wiseman because I do like Wiseman better than I like Edwards, but it just doesn't make much sense because I do think that they want to play Karl Towns at the 5. So as my third option, I am going to say draft Anthony Edwards. He can be a really, really good third option for you on the offensive end of the floor. Well, there's questions about the defense and the motor. I do think that he just seems to be a very high character guy. Every interview I've seen with him, I've loved it. I've loved everything he said, and I think that he's going to put in work to improve his game. And for that reason, I really, really think that he's going to end up being at least a starter in the NBA. Maybe he doesn't reach his potential of being an all-star, but he's at least going to be a guy who can give you 15 points per night. Maybe he becomes an average defender, and in that case, you've got a very, very solid player and a guy who really can be like the fourth or fifth starter on a championship team. I believe that that is something that Anthony Edwards is very likely to reach, and he also does have that all-star potential. He also is a very nice fit alongside D'Lo. Well, it is another guy who needs the ball in his hands, and it is another guy who's a minus on the defensive end of the floor. If you're taking this pick in your Minnesota, it means that you did not trade for a win now guy. It means that you're pretty much ready to just see what next season holds and try to improve with a core of D'Lo, Karl Towns, and whoever you take with this pick and see what kind of growth that core can have. So I guess my final option would be to take James Wiseman, my fourth option if I'm the Wolves. I don't think that they should take any of like Denny Avdija, Killian Hayes. I really like both of those guys, but I think it's a big stretch at 1. If you're going to draft one of those guys, great, but trade down with Charlotte, trade down with Chicago, trade down with Cleveland. Don't make that pick at 1. Find someone that will give you some extra value, and then you can take Denny at 4 or 3 or 5 or whatever it is. But what I was going to talk about was James Wiseman. I don't know if this happens because I do think they want to play Cat at the 5, which I have said many times in this video, but it's a fact that I believe to be true. If they were to draft him, it could be interesting as a guy who can rim run, a big man pick and roll with Karl Towns and James Wiseman could be a very, very fun wrinkle to their offense. But in the end, I just don't see it happening. Karl Towns having to defend 4 sounds like a disaster with how lazy he can be at times on defense. And I just don't think that it's the best option for them. So to recap, I think that the number one option if I'm the Timberwolves is to trade the pick. Second option is draft LaMelo Ball. Third option is draft Anthony Edwards. And fourth option is draft James Wiseman. Let me know what you think the Timberwolves should do with their pick in the comment section down below. that's it for me. I hope that you all enjoyed this video, and ladies and gentlemen, I will see you all again very soon.